Hello, and welcome to today's Info2Go webinar. My name is Annie Gaines, and I am the Continuing Education Consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. On behalf of the Commission for Libraries and our funder, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Ekstrand from Boise State University. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking with you today about online recommendation, what it is, how it works, where you find it. First, I want to say just a little bit about me. So I'm an assistant professor at Boise State, been there since 2016. Came by way of Iowa State University and the University of Minnesota. And a lot of my work, particularly most of my research work, focuses around studying tools that connect people to information. And this is what we call recommender systems. This includes information retrieval, looking at it from a lens of human-computer interaction to understand how is it that these systems actually interact with their users, with the people they affect. And I particularly am interested in a couple of broad questions, one being how bias and discrimination manifest in these kinds of systems. So when we're going and we're getting recommendations for books or music or products, what are the societal biases that can manifest in those systems? How do we measure them? What are the effects of those challenges? And then also, how can we build these systems so that we can empower experts and not replace them? How do we build recommendations? So some of my work particularly is on how do we make search tools that can help teachers more effectively help their students find information. A lot of work often focuses on directly like how can we help the end user of these systems, but I try to flip that around a little bit and look at how can we make tools that make it easier for information experts to more quickly find information and help meet the needs of the people that they're working with. I've been involved in what we call the Rexis community, the recommender systems community for quite some time. We have a conference where we go and we talk about research and product developments. I've been involved with that for a while. But the book I have on the screen here is the book that got me started in my career that I found at the Pocahontas Public Library when I was, I think, 10. And I brought it home. And to this day, I don't know why I picked up that book, but 25 years later, I'm still working in this topic. So I'm very happy to be able to give back to the institutions and community that started me on my own career journey. So my goals with the talk today are to so that you can understand what a recommendation is. Like when I say a recommender system or recommendation, what is that? Understand where they come from, like how are they being made, who's generating them, what data is being used to generate that. I'm going to talk some about recommendation and advertising. And so I want you to be able to understand the relationship between recommendations and ads and distinguish what we might call native or organic recommendations from ads, and then some tools to allow you and allow your patrons to take some control of your recommendations. And my goals here are both to give you tools and information in your own use of the web, but also then information that hopefully will be helpful as you're working with folks who come to your library and have questions about how their online information experiences work. I'm fine with taking questions as we go. I'm happy to planning to leave time at the end for questions, but also if questions come up as we go, I'm happy to take them. I am going to be trying to keep the corner of my eye on the raise hand button and the Q&A and chat, but also though, if I miss something, Annie will bring it to my attention. So please, you don't have to hold them to the end. So to get started, what is a recommender system? So it's really broadly, it's a computer algorithm and system that recommends things to people. I take a really, really broad view of this. So any kind of an algorithmic system where we're processing data in order to be able to produce to say, hey, you user, you might like this thing. It may be personalized. Often it's personalized. We think you specifically are going to like this thing. They take a wide variety of forms. So here's a screenshot from Spotify. The Discover Weekly channel is a recommender system where every week their recommender creates a new playlist for you of music that it thinks you might like. And here it's this list, and I can play through the whole list in order. I can shuffle it. I can pick individual songs. But it's producing this list of songs that it thinks I might like. The same domain, music, songs, Pandora, it gives me a radio station where instead of giving me a list of songs that I can play, that I can choose from, that I can explore, it just starts playing them. And if I don't like the song, I can skip it. But if I don't tell it to skip, it's just going to keep playing songs. So these recommendations can wind up taking a variety of different forms. We can recommend not just music, we can recommend news. A lot of news sites have some forms of recommendation built into them. So here I'm at the end of an article, and it's recommending that after this one, I might want to read an article on a K-12 task force in Moscow. So I'm to the end of the article, it's suggesting here's where you might want to go next. We also can see a variety of recommendation sources or recommendation forms. So here, if you're reading this article in the Washington Post, you see over on the right a list of articles that are currently locally popular on the Washington Post. Down at the bottom of the article, there's additional this additional panel, the Post recommends, where it's additional articles that I might want to read. And here, again, it's one of these systems where it's recommending things to me. It may or may not be personalized. Most read local looks like it's personalized in the sense that it's taking into account my location. It can tell, oh, you're reading from Idaho. It might be granular enough to say I'm reading from Boise. So here's articles that other people in your state or your region are reading. And then we've got other articles that I might read that might be just other articles from today's edition. But we've got these different recommendations to engage me and keep me reading more news. So we've seen a few examples here of different ways that recommendations can show up, different modalities. It might be things I can pick from. It might just start playing things. It might suggest one thing to come next, and I click next or not. We're talking about recommender systems and teaching about them. We distinguish a few different tasks that the recommendation can perform. And so here I've got a couple of screenshots from the Netflix app on my phone. And we have, on the left, we've got, I'm looking at the show Carmen Sandiego, and it says 86% match. And there the recommender is doing something we call predicting, and it's giving an estimate of how much it thinks I'm going to like this show. I don't know what 86% match actually means. Netflix is computing that somehow, and they think they're telling me an 86% match between this show and my preferences in some way. Some other sites, the prediction might be, we estimate you're going to like this 4.5 out of 5 stars. But we've got this thing here that's telling me, here's some information about how relevant we think this item, in this case, the TV show Carmen Sandiego, is to your personal preferences. Another one is what we call recommend. And this is where we talk about the name recommender systems. And on the right, we see more like this. And this is also for Carmen Sandiego. And here, rather than telling me, here's how much we think you're going to like this show, what it's telling me is, given that you're interested in this, if you like this show, here are some more shows we think you might like. And so The Hollow and Hilda and Cupcake and Dino, it's suggesting as related shows for people who are interested in Carmen Sandiego. The simple way so for any of these sites, some services say something about how they actually generate the recommendations. Some don't. Netflix is relatively open about how they do a lot of things. But looking at it, we can't necessarily know, oh, here's for sure how they're computing it. But we can make some inferences based on how they present the recommendations. Here, what they're probably looking at is people who watch the two shows together. And so a lot of people who watch Carmen Sandiego probably also watch The Hollow. Is one way that you can compute, that they can compute these kinds of recommendations. Another thing we can do is we can try to give a more detailed explanation for why something might be a good recommendation. And so here Goodreads is suggesting that I might want to read All Systems Read from the Murderbot Diaries. And it's giving me some information here. It's giving me some basic information about the book, the title, the author, a brief synopsis. It's also showing me the average rating from other Goodreads users. But then at the bottom, it's giving me an explanation for why it was recommended in the first place. And according to their data, this book is popular with people who read Anne Leckie's Imperial Rotch trilogy. And so it's saying, okay, because it's giving me more information just than, oh, we think you're gonna like All Systems Read. It's telling me because you liked Ancillary Mercy and its sequels, you might like All Systems Read. And I can say, oh, well, I did quite like those, and I would be interested in reading more books that are like those books. So All Systems Read looks like it's a recommendation worth checking out. So we can go a little deeper than just saying, oh, here's some books that you might try to do that. And a lot of some systems do more about explaining than others. Goodreads provides these kinds of explanations. Pandora has a feature where when you're playing a song, you can ask it, why did you play this song? And it will try to explain it to you. But we can produce these kinds of explanations in order to help the user try to make a more informed decision. So there's a little vocabulary that we use when we're talking about recommendation systems. Is first we have the items, and the items are the things that we're going to recommend. Books, songs, news articles. In Amazon, the items are basically almost anything that can be sold online. And then we have the users, and the users do a couple of things. They receive and they act on the recommendations. So you're browsing Netflix, and you've got the recommendation list of the things that you might want to watch. You see those recommendations, you act on them, you watch the movie, you don't watch the movie, etc. Users also provide input that's used for recommendation. And so when you rate a product on Amazon, that's input. When you but also just the actions you take, like the fact that you watch a particular movie on Netflix, or that you've added a book to your shelf on Goodreads, that also becomes data that gets used by the recommender system in order to try to infer what else you might like. And so it looks at so Goodreads looks at the pattern of all the different books that you've added to your shelves, and it uses them to try to find more books that are like the ones you've added, and it can look for those patterns. And we don't always, like, this input is not just the explicit input that we provide, but these systems collect a lot of data from our interactions with them, and all of that data becomes input to the recommender system. And in a lot of cases, they look, even if they do let you provide ratings, they look far more at what you do than what you say. And so if you're active on Amazon, you're buying products, you're reviewing and rating products, the recommendations that you get is primarily based on what you buy, not on the ratings you give. The ratings you give are there to help other shoppers make their decision. But as near as anyone can tell from public information, they don't play a significant role in actually providing the recommendations. But so we've got these users, we've got these, the users are providing this input, and then we have what we call ratings, which is a really, really broad term. It includes the 5-star ratings that you provide on Amazon or on Goodreads. It also includes Pandora has thumbs up and thumbs down. Those are ratings. But also we use the term to talk about the data, the information that we're getting from all of these different interactions. And so loosely we use the term rating to mean any kind of data that we have about user preference for items. So like if you like a post on Facebook, that's an interaction that's used that feeds into the recommender to say, oh, you liked that post, maybe we're going to show you more kinds of posts like that. And from a data perspective, we call that piece of data a rating. So we've got users, we've got items, we've got ratings. That's some of the vocabulary that we use. We're talking about how these systems work, how we evaluate them, et cetera. But one of the things, like when we're thinking about how recommendation works and the role that it plays in our online experiences, and these things are everywhere. Like you basically can't use the internet for very long at all without encountering some kind of a recommender system somewhere or another. It helps to think about why the recommender is being operated. And this can also play into the role, like if you're encountering a system and you're trying to determine how much you want to trust the algorithm that the Washington Post is using to give you related recommendations, or how much you want to trust the algorithm that Facebook is using to order to determine what shows up in your timeline any given time you log in. It's helpful to think about why these things are being run in the first place. And it helps us reason about the incentive alignment. Is the operator, the person who's, or the company, the institution that's providing me with this recommendation, how aligned are their incentives with mine? Or do they have, or are they incentivized to give me bad recommendations? And so there's a variety of purposes. One is just helping users find information. And to a large extent, this purpose is a proxy. Like a lot of the other purposes they're trying to help users find information in order to achieve their other goal. But there's a number of recommenders that do just operate purely to help users find information. There's many that operate to drive sales. And so most e-commerce sites have some kind of recommendation in them. The purpose of that recommendation system on Amazon or on Target.com or a small site running on top of Shopify, the purpose of these recommendations is to drive sales. To, for example, encourage people to buy more related products. Oh, you're buying this. Here's another thing that goes with it. We get another sale. One of the things that comes up with that, though, is the interaction between, say, the seller's profit margin and that recommendation, because from a purely financial perspective, they're probably incentivized to recommend of the things that are useful the one with the highest profit margin. But that can then backfire if they get a reputation for always recommending bad products. There's also the recommendation goal of keeping users engaged. And there's two versions of that. One is provide ongoing value, so your service is more valuable for its users in the long run. And another one is the more time the user is on your site, the more ads they watch, which then goes into your to your revenue. In one way, like a couple of ways to think about this, Netflix doesn't show ads. They have a lot of recommendation, but the recommendation from a business perspective, the purpose of the recommendation is to keep you engaged enough with their set of movies and TV shows that are available that you find it worth your subscription fee each month. As opposed to, say, Facebook, where the engagement from a financial perspective, the purpose that engagement serves is the more time you spend on the site, the more ad slots they can sell to put in front of you. There's also doing it to deliver user value. You want to make the service, this is related to helping users find information, but you really want to make the service valuable to your users over the long haul. You want to make it easier for them to find the information that they need, to find the entertainment that's going to keep them amused, etc. And then finally, there's some direct revenue ones. Recommendation technology also drives a lot of advertising. And so figuring out which ad we can put in front of this user that's going to maximize their likelihood to click it and generate more revenue. So sometimes there's the direct, like we're going to recommend so we can maximize our advertising revenue right here. But there's a variety of different purposes that institutions have for running recommendation, and they really vary quite a bit in their relationship to and alignment with helping users find the things that they truly need. I'm going to note quickly here, I'm going to talk more about advertising later, but if a slot is paid, it's supposed to be labeled in the United States. The FTC requires sponsored listings to be labeled. And so there's talk and discussion around how do the recommendations actually get there? Are companies paying to get their recommendation in that slot, or are they paying to get their search result here? If a slot is paid for, it's supposed to be labeled. There are going to be times when places don't do that, but in general, it's supposed to be labeled. So if it's not labeled from a US operator, if they're following the rules, then it's a recommendation that's produced from data, and is the seller is not paying for that slot there. So a lot of sites don't just have one recommendation system. There's a lot of different ways that recommendations show up in the system. And I want to, like, if there are any questions, as I said, I'm happy to take them as we go, or if you've got them, you can save them for the end as well. But here we've got, so I'm looking at the page for a bicycle light, a tail light for my road bike, the Knight Rider Saber 80. And there's a few recommendations here. First, we have the recommendation of frequently bought together, and it's suggesting here are some more products that you might want to buy with it and put into a package. Okay, a headlight going with a tail light is probably a pretty good recommendation for putting things together. I'm not sure why it's recommending two. Either people like two headlights, or a lot of people bought both and returned the one they didn't like. But it's suggesting that I might like a headlight to go with my tail light. From a business perspective, if they succeed in this sale, then they make more sales. The recommender can directly help them increase their help them directly increase their revenue. But then also from a user perspective, it makes it really quick and easy. If I'm looking for lights, okay, I found a tail light I like. Oh, okay, that headlight looks good enough. I'll just buy it. And it can help me as a user save time in finding the lights I want to buy for my bicycle. Then there's the sponsored products related to this item, and these are paid. We see that in a couple of ways. One, it says sponsored products. In Amazon's parlance, sponsored means somebody paid for it to show up here. And then down in the bottom right, we also have ad feedback, which gives us further indication that these are ads. But they aren't super distinguished from the other types of recommendations, but they are in a section that's labeled as sponsored. And so here we have different lights that whoever is selling the light paid to have it recommended to me. They might still be good recommendations, but they're not the recommendations that are just being driven by my interests and by the purchasing behavior of other users. These are recommendations that are being paid for. But then we've got another set of recommendations that is one of my personally favorite recommender services in Amazon. What do other customers buy after viewing this item? And we call this a substitute product recommendation, but here it's providing recommendations of, okay, people looked at this and then they bought that. And if a lot of people look at one thing and buy something else, that gives me a signal that, oh, actually I might prefer the other product. And in here, one of the cases is it's just a 2-pack that includes this light, but it helps me do comparison. Like the recommender is helping me do comparison shopping of the millions of products that are on Amazon. It's helping direct me to, okay, here are some of the ones that you should probably prioritize in your comparison shopping, so that as a shopper I can be more effective. And these are being driven again by the purchasing behavior of customers, and it's telling us where it's coming from. People looked at this, then bought that. So Also though, so in Goodreads has a few different recommendation services, and there's a lot of different places within the site that these kinds of things show up. But I have over here, readers also enjoyed. It's giving me related, or it's basically an algorithmic read-alike list effectively. But people who liked Consider Phlebas also liked Redemption Arc, The Evolutionary Void, etc. These are going to be straight recommendations. We also have a couple of ads that aren't terribly clearly labeled as ads, but from their format, we can infer that they are. And they're probably personalized, targeted, like targeted at least to the site. So what's not always clear when we're seeing an ad is to what extent is it targeted to me personally based on my interactions across the web, versus to what extent is it just, okay, people who read Consider Phlebas might like are in the target audience for quantum. But we've got the ads alongside the recommendations. Then LinkedIn has a number of things. Up at the top, we have an ad about Circle CI, and it's labeled as an ad over on the right. It's targeted to me. It's a relevant ad. A while ago, I used Circle CI on GitHub. I don't use it anymore, but I did. But also we have over at the top right, we've got recommended news items. The bottom right, we have recommended more news sources. And then over on the left, we've got some recency-based topics. And then in the middle, we've got my news feed, which is also recommended. So it's sort by top. They've got a recommender algorithm that's prioritizing the different posts that people in my network has faced. Facebook and Twitter work the same way. And so it's sorting these by an algorithmically estimated score of how valuable it thinks I'm going to find it right now. Also, this recommendations are not necessarily static. Like if I come back to the page in 5 minutes, it's going to have a different ranking. Oh, you saw Marco Tautik's new job. You might not want to see that right now, so we're going to show you some other news posts. But again, we got these recommendations showing up in the middle of the news feed. So a lot of companies are doing their own recommendations in-house. A lot of the large internet companies are. Amazon, they're doing their own recommendations. Goodreads, Spotify and Pandora both are heavily recommender-based companies. A lot of large players, they're doing their own recommendations. There's also companies, though, that sell recommendation as a service, to be either as a service on its own or as a service to be as a part of another service they're providing. So Outbrain sells cross-site recommendations to newspapers or newspaper sites. And so the Washington Post has the Post recommends at the bottom. A lot of smaller papers will pay a firm like Outbrain to generate those recommendations, and it will recommend sites across Outbrain's customers. And it's a combination of paid slots and traffic-based recommendations. There's straight ad platforms such as Criteo and DoubleClick. There's a lot of intermediaries in the advertising space. And then e-commerce platforms such as Shopify, like what they're selling is the ability to, okay, put up your e-commerce site without having to run your own server, without having to write all of your own code, so you can go and you can sell your products online. But one of the services that they provide as a part of that is recommendation. So if you're using Shopify to set up your online storefront for your small business, you can get recommendations just by turning them on. Some of these are labeled like recommendations by Outbrain. Some of them are behind the scenes and it's not clear who is providing the recommendations. But there are a lot of services in basically the companies that aren't in that top tier of the companies that really have to own their own recommender tech. They're buying it from one of these companies. And so here we've got some Outbrain recommendations, and it's a combination of more recommendations more articles from the Sun, from whatever article I'm looking at, and then a list of sponsored links to be able those are the paid slots, and they're labeled nicely as sponsored links. One of the things to note about the sponsored links is a lot of the sponsored links are sold by the click. And so when we talk about clickbait, one of the economic mechanisms that drive it is when you're selling the spot by the click. The incentive structure means that you want to have a headline and a picture there that are going to get people to click. And once they've clicked, you don't have an incentive to actually provide them with useful information on the other side of the click. And so the economic structure with the way these links are sold is aligned to maximize clickability without paying any attention to the value, the quality of the content that happens post-click. Because the ad company sells the click, you click on the article, some ads load while you see it. The company providing the article sells the ad impressions around it. Everybody makes money, and nowhere in the money-making process did they actually have to provide useful content. So we've got all these recommendations. They're showing up in a variety of ways. We've got advertising. Where does the data come from? And it comes from a variety of places. We've got item content. So the item content itself, the description of the item for like a news article, it's actually the content, like the content of the text of the article is that item content. We've got user interactions. As I said, people are rating things, clicking, purchasing. This can be on-site or cross-site. There's an extensive market in cross-site user tracking. And so what you click on Amazon can affect what you see in Facebook, et cetera, because everybody's selling data or using the same services that pool data. There's also user demographics and profiling data. Some of this may be provided by the user, like you fill out your Facebook profile or your LinkedIn profile, you give it some information. Also, there's data warehouses that will sell it to you. So there are services where you just drop a little widget in your website, someone comes, they've never been to your website before. And for some low price, they populate information about that user's demographic purchase or information purchased from a data warehouse that you can then use for tailoring your ads or your other content. There may be other aspects of user behavior history that then are available as input to this recommendation process. And then recommendation is mining all of these things. So what we call collaborative filtering looks for patterns in purchases or ratings. Doesn't actually care about the items themselves. It just looks at things like, oh, people who bought taillights also buy headlights. That's a pattern. I can exploit that. I can recommend headlights to people buying taillights. We can also learn rules from item features or descriptions. We call this content-based filtering. This becomes particularly important in things like news. So when you've got products like, okay, the taillight, they come out with a new taillight every couple of years or whatever, we can look at user patterns. But the news, we've got new news articles every day. This new article, we just published it. Who do we want to recommend it to? Nobody's clicked it yet. And so what we have to do is recommend these, or based on its actual content and its actual text and say, oh, it's similar to these other things that you've clicked on. And then we use this data to build statistical models or machine learning models to predict an outcome. A lot of them are focused on how do we optimize some kind of an outcome. This is connected with the economic purpose of the recommender. If we really want to understand, particularly from a lay perspective, what's going on with this recommendation, what the data is, what input does it have in order to be able to compute the recommendation, and then what is its outcome? The exact model, the exact details of how the statistical model works, they change all the time, but the outcome of it wants to predict whether or not I'm going to purchase this item or click this link. It wants to predict how much I'm going to rate this book or this movie. Wants to predict, am I actually going to continue watching? Am I going to continue watching this video on YouTube, for example, would be the kind of thing you can try to predict in one of these models. And so with those pieces, we can connect to current relevance. So we've got, this did not show up quite how I expected to. Oh, the release radar, that's the piece I was looking for. So here's Spotify release radar, and it's showing me new releases that I might like. So they're related to songs I've listened to in the past, but they're current. They just came out today. We can look to find other users who've liked similar books, find books liked by people who like my books. This kind of logic drives a lot of Amazon's online recommendations. And we can also look for latent patterns in user book interaction. And a lot of collaborative filtering do this. If you've taken a statistics class that talks about principal component analysis, that's the basic idea. But my purpose here today is not to dive into all of the details. But these are driven by machine learning approaches, and machine learning is just computers learning patterns from data. And a lot of current artificial intelligence is machine learning. It's statistics over large sets of data. So we've got data, we compute some kind of a model, it's going to produce some recommendations. So we've got the data, we're going to compute a statistical model, it's going to produce recommendations of movies or books or whatever. The user is going to do something, they're going to accept the recommendation, they're going to reject the recommendation. Their action becomes data that's used to train the next version of the model, and also we measure their interactions to see how did we do. For example, like when Amazon or when any of these big companies is going to try a new change to its recommender, it runs an experiment on its users. And it gives some of them the new recommender, some of them the old, and it looks, does the new recommender increase sales or whatever their metric is? They've got a metric, they've got metrics that they're looking at. They measure and they use that to refine how are they actually doing the model themselves. But the key thing here, as I said, is that they're optimizing some kind of an outcome measure. It might be sales, it might be renewed subscription, it might be hours of video watched, etc. But they've got some kind of an outcome measure. So I want to talk about a few examples here. So one example, so a related product recommender or a substitute product recommenders. We saw those on Amazon. So its purpose is to increase sales or satisfaction, to increase like, okay, we're going to recommend these a related product, it might increase the sales. Oh, okay, so we've sold 2 products now. A substitute product, it might increase my satisfaction. If their recommender can guide me to a product that's going to be better for my needs than the one I'm looking at, then I'm probably going to be happier. Oh, you helped me find the better product. The data that they have to drive this is sales history. They can mine this from their own sales, but small vendors can benefit from pooling sales data. And that's one of the services. I don't know that Shopify is doing this, so please don't take it to mean they are, but it's a service that places like Shopify can offer. They're providing storefronts for a bunch of small businesses. No one small business has enough data to generate good recommendations. But a lot of people probably buy from multiple such businesses, and so the data can be pooled to provide better recommendations than any one of the small stores could do on their own. And the outcome is we want people to buy the products that we're recommending. We can also look at news cross-promotion. So the purpose is to drive news traffic and consumption in advertising-based models, then to sell the advertising slots that are available when people are reading the article. Again, we've got the data, we've got browsing history and patterns, we've got article content. For better or for worse, a lot of the outcome here is clicks economically. Not always, but a chunk of it is. And we talked a little bit about the downside, one of the downsides of this model. Music streaming. Purpose, we want to provide these ongoing music streams users like. So either Pandora or the Spotify streaming radio. From an economic perspective, either we want them to keep listening and hearing ads on the free tier, or keep listening and renewing their subscription if they're paying for it. And then we've got a lot of different data, users' histories. We've got information about the music itself. And then the outcome is they keep listening, maybe they like some songs. Those are the ways we can measure, oh, if we keep playing and you don't skip you're not skipping the songs, you're not thumbs downing, you're probably liking them, or you're not paying attention. You might have just left the stream on in the background, but that's the outcome. Like the stream, you're continuing to listen to it. We use a tool here called, some services use a tool for this called reinforcement learning, which is basically a digital puppy. And so it recommends a song and it sees, oh, you thumbed up that song, or you didn't skip it. let's recommend another song like that. And it learns based on your feedback there, trying things and then seeing, do you like it? Do you not like it? And doing more of the things you like in order to refine your model and to give you these music recommendations. Timeline ordering, like what do you see when you go log into Facebook or you go log into Twitter or LinkedIn? They're wanting you to keep coming back to the service, and they're wanting you to view, and they're wanting you to spend time on the site. Economically, that lets them sell advertising. But then the data they've got the content of the items themselves, the text of what your friend actually posted. They've got your past clicks. They've got your browsing behavior across the web. You're browsing the web, you see the Facebook like button, like this on Facebook, tweet this button. Those buttons do not just give you convenience to be able to click, to be able to, oh, I liked this article, I'm just gonna hit like and share it on Facebook. They also track. And so whenever with very, very few exceptions, whenever those articles are, whenever those buttons are showing up, Facebook or Twitter or whichever service is providing the button is also getting data that you viewed that page. And they can feed that data into their recommendations, both on site in what you're doing in the ads they're showing you, the news timeline ordering, and also whatever other recommendation and analytics services they're providing. And the outcome, they want you to spend time on the site, click-throughs, likes, and replies. Now, I'm going to make a comment here that I don't have in my slide that, like, it can kind of sound a little troubling, but there can also be some really good outcomes of this. So Instagram ran an analysis when they introduced, because a lot of these services started with, it was just, you see what your friends posted in backwards order of time, and then they slowly added more algorithmic filtering. Instagram posted an analysis of what happened after they added a recommender to order your timeline. And they found that with the recommender, you were far more likely to actually see the posts by your close friends. Because if it's just by time and you happen to log in at the time when it's at the top of your feed, you see it. But if you log in 3 hours later, it's fallen off the bottom and you just don't spend enough time scrolling. The recommender lets them say, oh, this is a picture. It's by someone you interact with a lot. So we think the connection is stronger there. The social connection is stronger than what you see than maybe your average connection. But you haven't seen this one yet. When it was new, you weren't logged in, and now it's fallen off the bottom. So we're going to put it at the top of the list to make sure that you see it. And the metrics they were reporting from their own internal analysis, they made the argument that they dramatically increased your ability to actually see what your friends were posting rather than having it fall off the bottom because you didn't happen to look at Instagram at exactly the right time. So these can drive a lot of good things for social cohesion too, but they're a mixed bag, but they're happening. And it's useful to understand that that's what's happening when you go, like when you go and you log into Facebook, you've got this, or you log into any of these systems with the timeline. Very few systems have a timeline that's actually just the timeline in backwards order of time anymore. You've got this personalized filter that's trying to optimize what it thinks you're going to find the most valuable at any given time. So advertising recommendations there's a couple of variables. When we're trying to target an ad, we look at relevance with the ad. If it's more relevant to the user, they're more likely to click, more likely to be a useful use of the slot, but also the user's relevance to the advertiser. Advertisers don't want to spend they don't want to spend money putting ads in front of people who are unlikely to buy. The details of this are complicated, and it's a combination of recommendation where the algorithm is figuring out how much are you interested in this ad, and auctions where they stick up the slot and run a short auction for it. So if we're thinking about we're looking at some recommendations on a site, and we're trying to think about how do we think about this recommender system in our lives? How do we think about the information that it's giving us? A few questions to ask are, first, is the recommendation relevant? Like, we can look at the items being recommended and say, are these relevant to my needs, to my interests? Then are they explained, and does the explanation make sense? Are they organic or are they sponsored? Hopefully that's well labeled. And then why is it being recommended? Who's doing this recommendation, and why do they have an interest in recommending these products to me? Good recommendations, though, can still come from misaligned interests, and sites that are well aligned with your needs and incentives can just have bad recommendations. So it's not a bright line rule, but it's something to think about as you're evaluating recommendations in your life. I am going to skip a couple of slides here to get to starting to take control. So do want to leave time for questions. So some sites let you take direct control of the data. So first, to let you take direct control of the data in your recommendations. So Amazon has a browsing history where they show you the things they've recorded you browsing that are going to feed into your recommendation. You have the option to remove things from this history. If you looked at a product and you like, I don't want recommendations about this anymore, you can go into your browsing history and delete it. And they'll stop using that as the basis for your recommendations. Pandora has station settings where you can go in and like undo liking songs in a station. Some sites give you this kind of direct control that you can go in and make these changes. You can also look at your purchase history in Amazon, and you can say, if you check that this was a gift, you can just say, hey, I just don't want to use this recommendation for use this item for recommendations. I bought the policy paradox, but don't give me more recommendations about policy books. You can say, I prefer not to use it for recommendations. We've got the editing system in Pandora. You can also provide feedback on some systems. Like Pandora uses the thumbs up and thumbs down to guide your station. Not all sites that provide feedback opportunities actually use the data. Netflix, your ratings play a very small role in recommendation. You can prune your history. So Goodreads uses what you have on your shelves. So if you go and you go clean up your to-read shelf and remove books you're never going to get to reading, that then will translate into affecting what recommendations you're going to get. Some sites, you have a private mode where you can say, just ignore what I'm doing for a little while. And so Spotify has that kind of a setting where you can say, so if you want to go try out some music and you don't want it to go affect your recommendations or show up in your friends list, you can turn on private mode. It's important to note, though, that private browsing is really, really like Chrome's private browsing mode, really limited in its ability to help you. You can also ask nicely. Your browser has a feature called Do Not Track, which asks sites not to track you from site to site. Most sites ignore this, but a few comply with it. Medium helps enforce, like if someone's embedded a YouTube video, so I have this turned on, Medium follows it, and if someone's embedded a YouTube video and I'm browsing and I have it turned on, Medium says, we haven't embedded the video because YouTube doesn't honor this. Click the link to actually go to the video. You can also, some advertising networks let you opt out of cross-site tracking, but it has to be done on a per advertising network basis, and not all do. You also get some privacy settings, like for example, here's a screenshot from Pinterest's privacy settings, where you can tell them whether or not you want them to use the sites you visit. This is collected through that little pin it button, remember, to improve your recommendations and ads. You can say no, and you can say no, don't buy information for my recommendations and ads. So you can give them some control, or they give you some control. Now these things, I call it asking nicely, because they depend on the company that's running the recommendation service to actually honor that in a way that maps to what you expect. But some companies do give you some of this kind of control. Another one is that's more aggressive, is to run an ad blocker. And the ad blocker is going to block a few things. It's going to block ads themselves. And this can provide some security and performance benefits as well. Ads slow down sites. They take battery on your phone. Also, ads are a huge distribution vector for malware. There's a lot of viruses and Trojans and such that are being distributed through advertising. But they also, a lot of the good ones will block cross-site trackers. And so a lot of ad networks, or the Facebook and the Twitter stuff, they're keeping track. As you go across the internet, they're able to track this profile of you across all of these different sites. And ad blockers will block those trackers, so they're not, at least it's much harder for them to collect that information on you and use it then to drive your recommendations and advertisements. The result of doing this is to give you a lot more control over when the recommendations show up, because some of them get blocked as ads, and also what data is actually available to the advertising and recommendation networks. This is something you can do that doesn't require them to cooperate. Another one is to be careful around the apps on your phones. There's a lot of permissions that an app can take, like your location, your microphone, etc., your contacts. And so watching the permissions on your apps on your phone can really can let you take some control over the data that's being that they're allowed to use to do the recommendations. One big thing is a lot of social apps, they want to sync your address book, and this lets them slurp up a lot of information about who is connected to who, because your address book has the phone numbers, the email addresses of your contacts. One of the failure cases of this was a combination of location and address book. Facebook recommended a therapist's patients follow each other. Oh, you're often at the same location, you have the same person in your phone book. Well, that same person was their therapist. And so you've got some failure cases like this that can show up when sites are making use of this information. I believe Facebook has since addressed that, so that specific failure mode is far less likely to happen on Facebook now. But the data can be used in ways that we don't expect and perhaps did not think about or want. So I'm going to skip this one as well. The slides are online. You can go look at them. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat at the end here. Another thing you can do is to compartmentalize. So I use different browsers for different purposes. Like I'm using Chrome for my work browsing and Edge for my personal browsing. And so that way, what I do for work and what I do for myself don't cross over as much. Firefox lets you compartmentalize sites from each other. You can say, okay, I'm going to log into Facebook, but I'm not logged into Facebook when I'm viewing all of my other sites. But there's limits to what you can do. Some people will suggest using Tor. You have to be Tor is like the super aggressive privacy browsing system, but it also has some severe security problems that can put you at risk occasionally. So like, unless you really know what you're doing or need to use it, it also slows things down a lot. But some things I recommend not worrying about, like same site interactions, like Amazon generating recommendations based on what I bought from Amazon, or Facebook doing things based on what I looked at and clicked on Facebook. I don't find that very concerning because they know what you do. Like businesses keep records and they use their business records. The thing that where I personally, when I'm thinking about what I'm okay with as a user and as a developer, is when they're sharing information with each other or when they're collecting it from other engagements. Like Facebook, it's fine that Facebook knows what I click on their site. That's their business records. Why should Facebook know what I view on a million other sites on the web? Ad blockers let you take control of that kind of thing. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to take questions. I'm also available, like if you want me to give versions of this talk for your staff or if you want to set something up with some of your library patrons, I am happy to do that. For now, it'll be online. Once COVID's under control, I do have a grant that gives me money to travel around Idaho, so I'm happy to do that in person, hopefully in about a year or so. But yeah, any questions?
As people are thinking and typing, I just want to say thank you so much for offering this presentation. I think it's super interesting to hear about the data and information side of things that we interact with all the time that we might not be thinking about.
Glad to be here, glad to help. It is fascinating. Like it's sometimes it can get a little creepy, like, oh, there's all this information getting tracked, but also like it's not all bad. I mean, I study these things, I teach students how to build them. There's a lot of good that can be done around helping people more quickly find products or reading material that's actually going to be useful for them. And one of the things that I'm trying to push more people in my community to study is how to make it more useful for experts as well. And that's something where, honestly, right now, the technology is very, very underdeveloped. We have not done, there has not been much work yet with, okay, are there ways we can use recommendation technology to make your reader's advisory service more effective? I think there probably are. There hasn't been a lot of work yet in that kind of thing that I've seen. Hopefully over the next years, we're going to see some of that kind of work where we're thinking seriously about how, like, you all are experts in helping people who come into your libraries find information. How can we make you more effective? So a question in the chat on the recording, I believe it's been recorded. So is it going to be, you'll be sending a link out to people?
Yes, everyone who registered for this will receive a link to the recording, as well as any links that Michael provides. So the links to his slides and his contact information.
Okay.
And a survey as well.
Great.
Very cool. I remember Pandora, thinking about how Pandora was deciding which songs to recommend to me, being one of the early points of thinking about a master's in library science, because it was so interesting, but I couldn't see it. Like, I couldn't see what the structure was or what the data was, and it was like maddening to me. And I just had to be like, what is vamping? What is vamping that is so exciting to me? So yeah, it definitely sparked an interest.
And Pandora has been an interesting journey because they started out with, like, they had the music genome where they were tagging all these songs with those kinds of things. And they started out with really, okay, how can we turn the music genome into a service? And then as time went on, they've had to add more and more features because, and also start using a lot more things around user response, because just the genome itself that they started out with let them do some cool things, but also held back the recommendations in some ways. But they've been continually evolving. And now, I mean, they're still using the genome, and it's a combination of the genome optimized by then what they're seeing with user feedback and response. And they're doing the digital puppy a lot.
Ooh, well, no questions so far.
Yeah.
I want to be conscious of everyone's time. If you have any questions for Michael, please type them in the chat. Or if you're still pondering, still thinking about this, you'll get a link to his contact information in an email in a couple days. So you can follow up with him if you have any specific questions.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for doing this. This is so great. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.